Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Canada Talks Electric Cars, and we thank you all for being here with us today. We do our best every month to bring you speakers and topics relevant to Canadian EV enthusiasts and invite you to send us your own suggestions for future episodes. We'd really appreciate hearing from you. So, what are Canadians really thinking about EVs, and what has been their experience with them so far? This is an area of inquiry that C.A.A. set out to uncover in their recent survey of EV owners across Canada. Remember to ask questions about the presentation at any time using the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar. We often, receive more questions than can be answered in the time available, so be sure to click and like any of the questions you see posted there that happen to interest you. We're delighted today to introduce Kristine D'Arbelles, Senior Director, Public Affairs for C.A.A. National. Kristine comes to us with more than a decade of experience working to represent the interests of the traveling public. As Senior Director with C.A.A., she manages and executes communications initiatives and programs on C.A.A.'s 5 pillars, which are road safety, environment, mobility, infrastructure, and consumer protection. Kristine has been one of the lead spokespersons on C.A.A.'s national research on EVs in Canada. She holds a master's in communications management from McMaster University and is based in Ottawa, where she lives with her husband and her son. Kristine, thanks for joining us today and welcome to the webinar.
Thanks so much for having me, Tim.
Oh, it's great to have you here. C.A.A., strikes a nerve with a lot of people right across Canada, and I know we've been members for many years, and it's just a comfort to know that C.A.A. is there when we need them. Although, knock on wood, it hasn't been very often that we've needed them, but it's great insurance to have.
Yes, no, we love that you're members, but we hope that you never have to need to use us. So, and if you
Exactly.
have to use us, we hope that you have a really good experience regardless. So,
Yeah, for sure. Thank you. Well, I'm going to let you share your screen, and I'm going to get out of the way and just let you have at it.
awesome. Thank you so much again for having me here today. I'm really excited to share the results that C.A.A. got from our most recent survey. And our goal was to figure out what EV drivers, their real experience of owning an EV. And it's funny, I've spoken to many groups about the results of this survey, international automobile organizations, international environmental organizations, and government of all different levels. But this is actually the first time that I present to EV owners. So I wouldn't be surprised if some of you on this webinar actually responded to the questions of our survey. So hopefully none of the results here are going to be a surprise to you. Maybe some of it will, but I really hope to learn as much from you guys as you'll learn from this survey. Now, before I jump in, I did want to provide a little bit of background. Why is C.A.A. involved in this? 10 years ago, when I actually started at C.A.A., one of my first projects was to put together a little EV web portal and a campaign. At the time, it was very, very basic information. As some of you know, if you've had an EV for as long as 10 years, you know that the EV adoption at the time was below 1% of new car sales. It didn't matter. We have been dedicated to the zero emission vehicle future. Again, for a decade, we knew this was coming. We knew it was important. So we wanted to be there, wanted to plant our flag, and we wanted to start having this conversation with EV drivers. So we started to create some information, basic information, just for people who were curious. They may have heard of an electric vehicle. Maybe they saw a Nissan Leaf once drive by. So we wanted to make sure that people just knew the basic, what's the difference between a level 1 and a level 2 and a fast charger? What's the difference between a battery electric and a plug-in hybrid? So we've been doing public education around electric vehicles for a good decade right now. Fast forward a little bit to 10 years, 10 years now into the future, and while it's still early days, we're seeing massive growth, and the perfect example is the EV Society here, and the fact that there are several people logged in here who are EV drivers themselves. You guys, it's no surprise in Q1 of 2023, Canada saw 9.1% of new vehicles registered that were electric vehicles. So we're seeing massive growth every single quarter. And for the first time, again, compared to 10 years ago, when there was less than 1%, and seeing a EV on the road was a very rare occurrence. Nowadays, you can be walking through your neighborhood. My neighborhood, for example, there's 2 or 3 people who own electric vehicles. So it's not that uncommon now to see an electric vehicle drive by. So finally, C.A.A. had felt, why don't we ask the public how they feel about electric vehicles? And we've known what the general public has felt about electric vehicles. We've been asking just the general public, why do you want to buy an EV? Why don't you want to buy an EV? So we've known what the general population generally thinks around electric vehicles, but no one had really stopped and just talked to electric vehicle owners themselves. Now, we're not the first ones to do this. There have been other surveys of electric vehicle owners in Canada. They've tended to be a little bit smaller, a little bit more niche, maybe very regional based. This is the first time, though, that anyone in Canada has been able to do a survey of this size. We surveyed, and actually that'll bring me to my next slide. But before I get to that, the one other thing that I wanted to mention is, we do have a government mandate of 2035 of having all new vehicles zero emissions. And another reason why we wanted to do this survey is C.A.A. has 7 million members across the country. So we represent quite a few Canadians. And again, we are, dedicated to this zero emission future. And we do want to encourage people to purchase electric vehicles by providing them with, honest, fact-based, unbiased information so that they can make that transition if it fits their needs. But then also part of that is we wanted to make sure that we could represent electric vehicle drivers in Canada, because many of our members are EV drivers as well. And this survey really showed us the pros of owning an EV in Canada, and then a couple of the cons and a couple of things that the government can do to make life a little bit easier for electric vehicle owners. So we're also there representing Canadians, or we're representing the voice of the Canadian travel in the federal government. So a little bit about the survey, just some quick methodology here. The way that the survey, we worked with a company called PlugShare Research. I am sure that everyone knows who PlugShare is. But just to recap, they are a research and analytics organization powered by the largest survey panel of EV drivers in the world. They also happen to have a map of EV charging stations across North America. So we partnered with them just because they had access to EV drivers. And we sent out our survey and we got back 16,000 responses. And that's 16,000 Canadian EV owners sharing their experience and their views on owning an electric vehicle in Canada. So given the sheer size of responses that we were able to get, we were actually also able to get not just a regional results, but a truly national result. We even had results from like PEI and Alberta and Saskatchewan, in places that are not always normally served by electric vehicles and might have a smaller percentage of EV owners. But we were still able to get because we were able to get 16,000 response, we were able to even figure out how the experience of an EV driver in Saskatchewan and Alberta was compared to Quebec and Ontario, for example. And then finally, we did ask what kind of electric vehicle you had, not only so that we can divide it between battery electric and plug-in electric vehicles, or plug-in hybrid, electric vehicles, but we also asked about the specific model. And the reason why that's really important is, and I'll tell you a little bit later, but we learned about something called the Tesla experience through these survey results. So being able to actually know what type of vehicle these EV owners owned was able to help us figure out if there was different experiences based on the vehicle. So I guess you guys are all curious. What is the real world experience of owning an EV in Canada? Again, it won't be a surprise. You guys are EV drivers. So you probably know the experience, but here is what 16,000 responses, 16,000 EV drivers told C.A.A. In our survey. So number one, pre-purchase concerns dissipate drastically. We're talking about 25 to 40% drops in concerns for some of the biggest perceived issues of owning an electric vehicle. So what do I mean by this? Hands-on ownership experience really changes the perspective of a driver once they've actually been in an EV. So some of the things that dissipated drastically is driving range. Concerns about driving range went from 67% of people before they owned an EV were quite worried about the range of their vehicle. And that dropped to 30% post-purchase. So a massive drop in concern. The other really popular one is the cold weather performance. I'm sure we've heard it time and time again. And, whenever you might mention that you own an EV, I wouldn't be surprised how many times someone asks you, oh, well, does it survive in the winter? We know this from C.A.A.'s general polling that we do with the general population. We know that cold weather performance is a massive concern of the general public. But what we were able to learn in this survey is that it is a perceived concern, and it's actually not a real concern, because cold weather performance concerns dropped 25% from pre-purchase to post-purchase. And then worries about battery degradation, right? Just people don't understand how this battery works. Is it like the battery in my phone? Is it gonna die while I'm halfway on the highway? Am I gonna have to charge it almost every half an hour? We all tend to draw our experience of battery usage based on, the phones in our pocket, which is not always reliable. But as you guys know, battery degradation is not a massive issue, and worries around battery degradation dropped 41%. So what this meant for C.A.A., and we're really excited to get these responses, because again, the position of C.A.A. Is to help educate the Canadian public on electric vehicles. So if anyone might be curious about an EV, our hope is that we can provide them with honest, unbiased information about electric vehicles. We've learned from time and time again that going to an auto manufacturer, people are hesitant to trust all the information, because that audio manufacturer wants to sell you a car, versus C.A.A. can come at it from a very honest and unbiased perspective. We have no skin in the game. If you want an EV, great, we will be there to support you. If you don't want an EV, that's okay too. Our perspective here is to be able to provide the information, and getting the results like this was really helpful, because now we can go back to Canadians and say, all right, these concerns that you're really, really worried about. Well, guess what? EV drivers that are actually driving electric vehicles on the road today don't actually see them as major concerns. Now, one of the concerns that didn't drop as much was around public charging. So we really heard from EV drivers in Canada that this is one area of EV ownership in Canada that can be improved. More than 4 out of every 10 respondents said that they worry about the lack of public charging. So we asked about a variety of aspects of public charging. We didn't just, ask a blanket question. We asked about, charger reliability. So when they showed up, was the charger actually working? The location and the convenience, were they able to easily get to a charging station? And then also the speed of the charger. Did they have to wait when they actually plugged in their vehicle? Was it working properly? And were they able to charge as quickly as possible? More than 1 in 4 drivers rated their experience with level 2 charging negatively. So again, this is an area as C.A.A. wanting to represent, 7 million Canadians across the country. This is an area that we can bring to government to be able to say, maybe there's some improvements here so that we can help not only EV drivers on the road today by making the experience a little bit better, but then also help transition curious EV drivers or future EV drivers. And public charging, as this group will be well aware of, is quite important. And we didn't realize how important it was until we actually asked how much charging was spent outside of the home. And out of the 16,000 respondents, 30%, or the responses from the 16,000 EV drivers said that 30% of their time charging is done outside of the home, which for me was a surprise. It was a little bit higher than I had expected. So this is why having unreliable public charging is not ideal, especially if you spend a third of your time charging outside of the home. The other thing that we learned is there is a lack of confidence in long road trips. There's a little bit of nervousness around doing long road trips, and sort of goes hand in hand with the public charging experience. So significant minority, about 36%, lack the confidence in taking a road trip with their EV. Which was no surprise. Most of the EV drivers from our survey, 67% of them still owned a gas vehicle. So they have what we call is the hybrid the hybrid garage, right? They've got one gas vehicle and then one electric vehicle. We've seen that is quite common here in Canada. However, this is where things got interesting for us. We actually saw that Tesla owners, when they answered this survey, they were 15% less likely to be concerned about long road trips. Any Tesla owners on the call today are probably shaking their head. And of course, yes, it's a lot easier to take a long road trip in Tesla. And that's mainly due to the charging network that they have across Canada that's been put on major throughput routes. And of course, it's the public fast charging network. So this is really important for us, not because we want to convince everyone to buy Teslas by all means, but what we can learn from the public fast charging network that Tesla has put together, because Tesla owners clearly don't have as much of a concern to take a long road trip. But of these 67% who actually own a gas vehicle, that's what they use for their long road trips. The EV stays at home and is more of their commuter car, while long road trips to maybe the cottage on the weekend, that's when they switch over to their gas vehicle. Despite any of those concerns, and again, those were the major concerns that came back, it wasn't a very long list. Despite all of those concerns from the respondents of 16,000 drivers, EV owners love their EVs. And we measured this using several different methods. And in every single method, EV owners just loved their EVs. So I'm assuming that this will be no surprise to those on the call and to who are part of this group. First we asked if they would actually purchase another EV in the future, and nearly every respondent, I think it was like 97 or 98%. So even when you're factoring in sort of margin of error, we're talking about nearly every single respondent, 16,000 people who responded, are going to continue their experience with an electric vehicle and purchase another one. Also, EVs rated higher in experience when it came to comparing their EV to their gas vehicle. So 9 in 10, 89% said that they enjoy driving their EV more. They just say it's a more enjoyable ride. 95% say that their EV is more affordable. 92% that their EV said their EV is a quieter ride than their gas vehicle. So there's again many reasons why someone, if they have a hybrid garage and they have the option of jumping into two cars, they want to grab their EV. It's just a quieter, more comfortable, more affordable ride. Finally, we also measured something called an NPS score, which is essentially a customer loyalty score, which is used by auto manufacturers and big companies to basically measure how satisfied a customer is or how loyal they are to your particular brand. We didn't do NPS tied to a specific brand. We just wanted to know the loyalty of someone to their particular EV, and their scores ended up somewhere in the 80s, which is considered world class scores. Like there are organizations out there that strive to get NPS scores of 80. And out of our 16,000 respondents, when we asked them how much they were loyal and how much they loved their EV, they ranked them super, super high. So EV drivers in Canada, they're just happy. They're happy with their purchase, and they're going to stick with that purchase despite some of the concerns that they shared with us. And that's all I have for you guys now. I'm more than happy to answer some questions. I wanted to make sure that I left plenty of time for questions. So I guess I will hand it back to you, Tim.
All right, thanks, Kristine. That's terrific. I have to say one of the things that strikes me about the yeah, I guess you could. Yeah, we go. One of the things that strikes me about what you've done and what C.A.A. is doing is very much what EV Society is all about, which is informing the public, educating consumers about electric vehicles, and it strikes me that you've sort of taken the same path and you're doing the same thing. And what I really like about the survey and some of the results, the questions you asked and the results, is that it's like a third party endorsement because I know I do, and I know that a lot of the folks on this webinar right now who drive EVs, they say these things to people all the time. And well, some people hear us. Others, I suspect, kind of brush us off and say, "Well, you're a one-off eccentric, eco nut or something." But what this is saying is that the experience is a common one, and
Mhm.
I think it's pretty powerful if people from the general public look at these results and they can't help but realize that for so many people to be so pleased and passionate about electric mobility, there's something to it. It's not
Yeah,
a random thing.
yeah.
So anyway, I didn't want to spout off about that, but
No,
Jason,
yeah, it's great. Yeah.
Jason, could you join us here, please?
No problem. Ready to begin Q&A?
Well, let's do it.
Okay. The, this one, I know, Kristine, you'll be able to answer. How will the C.A.A. plan to respond to emergency charging calls in a similar way to out of gas calls?
Right now, so C.A.A. is a federation of 8 independent clubs. So if there are any C.A.A. members on the call, you are a member of a club within our country. I'm at the national office, and we're a secretariat for our club. So we do the little bit behind the scenes work for you so that for you, it's a seamless experience across the country. Right now, various clubs, it doesn't matter where you are in the country, if you have an electric vehicle, we'll pick you up. We've heard stories of, someone heading off to a cottage and, end up stuck because they lost power and they weren't able to charge their vehicle. So called C.A.A. and we were able to put their vehicle on a flatbed and take them to either a local charging station or take them home, depending on the availability or how large their membership was. So if you're an EV driver and you are a C.A.A. member, we'll respond to you. We're sort of whatever's underneath your hood, we don't care. If you're a C.A.A. member, we're going to come and rescue you, regardless of the vehicle that you have. Of course, EVs are a little bit different, so we do treat them with care, which is why we use flatbeds and we don't drag the electric vehicle behind a truck. But we're also, a couple of our clubs have also started to experiment with roadside charging and clean roadside charging. So in Quebec, at C.A.A. Quebec, a couple years back, we tested charging people at roadside with a ionic a Hyundai Ioniq, and tested to see if that would work. We learned a lot of lessons, and pros and cons of doing that, how fast it was to charge someone at the side of the road with another electric vehicle, and then what we had to do with that electric vehicle after we had charged someone. So all of our clubs are really dedicated to this future, and dedicated to our members, regardless of what kind of vehicle you have. And we're always trying to innovate and find the easiest way to help you from point A to point B if you happen to be in the unfortunate situation of breaking down.
Thank you. Next one is more a policy one. The biggest impediment to EV adoption and meeting our emissions goals is the inability of EV owners to charge overnight at home if they live in a condo. What is C.A.A. doing to encourage the provincial governments to offer rebates, subsidies, any other incentives for the installation of charging infrastructure in MURBs?
That's a really good question, and we were actually curious to know what the experience was of people in multi-unit buildings, so apartments and condos. The vast majority of EV owners today do own their home. But I think it's about 22%, which is still a surprise to me. It was a larger number than I expected, but 22% of EV owners, again, based on our 16,000 responses, said that they live in a multi-unit dwelling. And when they shared with us their charging experience, no surprise, their out-of-home charging experience was even more important, and they spent significantly more time using the public charging network. So it was even more important for them to have a strong public charging network near them. We have spoken to various levels of government, and we're there supporting. There's other organizations that speak on this quite regularly, to make sure that new buildings that are coming in are coming with the ability to have charging stations, having opportunities for people to retrofit certain parking spots without it having to cost an arm and a leg. So there's still a lot of work to be done. To be honest, this is early days when it comes to this solution. But what this survey did for us is it showed, when we did go in and present it to government, it showed them that it's not 1% who are living in multi-unit homes, like apartments and condos. There's 22% of the 16,000 respondents. So you can do the math there. There's a lot of people who own EVs who don't have a dedicated garage space where they can just put a charging spot. So this was something that government definitely jotted down. Again, this is a new survey. It's only been out for a couple of months, so I can't say that there's that we've gotten any promises from government to do anything, but they did note it down, and I know that it is a priority of theirs.
22% is actually higher than I expected. Encouraging, I would say.
It is encouraging.
The next one is, I think, really outside of C.A.A.'s area of expertise, but we have a number of EV charger related questions. So I'm going to ask one or two, maybe paraphrase them, and feel free to just say, this is outside of our wheelhouse. First one is, the usual thing. Why are so many EV chargers out of order, making EV ownership a very stressful experience? Have you received any feedback? Do you have any opinions on that?
So what we found out from this survey is exactly that result, is that there's just so many charging stations that are unreliable. And you know what, I was doing some camping the other day, and I happened to be driving in a small town, and I was really excited to see an EV charger. And I went to go see if it was working, and it wasn't working. And I kind of rolled my eyes, and I thought, of course, not only are we in a small town, this is probably the only EV stop that you're going to see for a couple of hours, and it doesn't work. And it was really unfortunate to see that it wasn't working. And that's based on this survey, more common than I think we would like. Unfortunately, I don't have the reason. I wish I did. What we found out is that this is a problem, and it is something that we've brought to government, because one thing that the federal government did is, and some provincial governments as well, is they, on board with this, zero emission future. Let's get charging stations. This is super important. So they sort of flooded the market with some funding to get people to install charging stations without a plan of making sure that there was sort of some maintenance. So that we're trying to encourage, to make sure that when charging stations are installed, which is great, and we want that, we want charging stations to be installed, that there's some sort of ownership that comes with making sure that it's going to be maintained in the future. So that's something that we've called on, is making sure that there's a little bit more ownership on some maintenance, to make sure that once a charging station is installed, that's great. Step one. Step two is, let's make sure that it's actually maintained, so that people can use it.
Definitely. I don't think anyone will disagree with that approach. Next one is more a product suggestion. It would be useful if C.A.A. sold a higher category towing range membership. My kids broke down north of Superior this summer in my Tesla. We were able to get it fixed, but if we had not, it would have needed a 900-kilometer tow. So something maybe to pass on to the appropriate people.
Yes, for sure. I don't. You are right. I don't think we have a membership that allows for a 900-kilometer tow. But I will bring that as feedback to our automotive group.
Okay, another charging related question. I'm going to paraphrase this one a little bit. Did you receive any survey responses from people that have accessibility issues? And did they have anything to say about using EVs and charging as someone that needs accessibility help?
So we didn't actually ask that question. We may have received responses from someone who had an accessibility issue, but we didn't specify that. So I don't have results. However, that's a very interesting perspective. And again, because we know that the public charging can improve, this would be a wonderful question that we could ask in, our EV owner survey 2.0. C.A.A. was really happy doing this survey. We thought it surfaced a lot of great opportunities to talk about the real world of owning an electric vehicle. And we'd really, really like to do this again. And we've started to look for funding so that we can potentially do this again, maybe in the next year or two. So part of that is continuing to do these presentations and talking to real EV owners like I am now, and wondering, what did we not ask, and what more can we ask about the experience? This first round was really to test our methodology. We had known that there are a couple small surveys out there, maybe 1,000 people, or some regional surveys. They had been done and sort of sporadically. No one had done a national, fully national survey of this size. So for the first round, we asked 30 questions, and we really wanted to just test our methodology and make sure that things worked and were solid. And I'm happy to say that it did. And we're really happy with the results, and also happy with how we were able to break down the results so that we can get these little nuggets of information. So I love that question. I think it's a very important question, and would love to consider putting that in our hopefully our next annual version of this the survey.
Okay, thank you. Now, for this one, you can put on your insurance underwriter's hat. And someone was commenting that they're currently a C.A.A. insurance customer, but they had to switch away because for a year, CAA would not insure their property because they had an EV charger. That's apparently changed. Do you have any insight into what happened there?
I don't. I wish I had an insurance adjuster hat. That would be a very interesting hat to put on, but I'm not an insurance expert. I do know that today, quite a few of our clubs and insurance products, you can get a discount if you own an EV, so you get discount on your insurance. The property one surprises me. I did put my email. I stopped sharing my screen, but I did mention to Tim before I started my presentation. My email is quite easy to find online, and I'm more than happy, because I won't have all the answers, especially on something like this, because I'm not an expert in insurance. I'm more than happy to have people send me an email and dig into some of this for them. So feel free to email me directly, and let's get to the bottom of it.
Okay. The next question or comment is, will CAA ask hotels to state whether they have level 2 chargers, and if so, the conditions of use, just like CAA currently asks hotels to state things like if they're pet friendly or not?
Mm-hmm.
This would be great to have in the list of features.
It would be. This survey was sort of a first step in figuring out the experience. And now that we know that public charging can have its growing pains, it's a wonderful idea to bring forward to our travel group who handles the relationship with the hotels. And we even do things like diamond awards, so you can win or not win, but you can receive a diamond award based on sort of the stuff that a hotel can offer, whether it's clean, the service is good. We've got a variety of things that we measure, and one of the things that's in there is whether or not they have a charging station. So that gives hotels extra points in our awards, a diamond hotel diamond measurements. So it's there. So I love that idea, and I'll bring it to the travel team. But yeah, this survey was sort of our first step in figuring out where the pain points are. So this is a great idea that we can bring forward.
Okay, I'm just trying to catch up. The questions keep moving around. Of the small percentage of EV owners that said they were going back to a traditional ICE vehicle, did they provide any insight or reasoning for that move?
So we had so few people. So the question that we asked is, are you going to buy another electric vehicle? And again, it was 97 or 98%. And generally with surveys of this side, you always get 1 or 2% margin of error. So a 98% response is pretty much 100% response when you talk to an average pollster or a survey expert. So for the number of people who said no to that question was less than 1%. So we did not ask them to qualify, but I would say that there is such a small number. We were probably only looking at a handful of people. However, it's something that I'd love to add in a future survey. Even if it is only a handful of people, why not ask them? If we do get the no, why not ask them why they wouldn't go back? I'm sure we would learn something. But again, the vast majority out of the 16,000 respondents, 97, 98% said that they're going to buy it, a new one. So I don't think there's a huge issues when it comes to keeping people in their electric vehicles.
You mentioned during your presentation that Tesla owners had a very different response when it came to road tripping, and there was a big gap in opinions there. Did you see that in any of the other questions on your survey, or was that the big standout?
That was the big standout for Teslas. For the most part, uh, Tesla and all other EV owners ranked very similar. I think other than that experience, I think their NPS score, so their loyalty, might have been a couple points higher. But other than that, Tesla had a very similar experience, except when it came to the public charging experience, just because they had access to that robust fast charging network.
Okay. And related to that, for the non-Tesla owners, was long road trips the major concern, or did they have other major concerns versus the Tesla drivers?
So their major concern was long road trips. Our question was, do they feel confident driving going on a long road trip with their electric vehicle? That was the specific question that we asked them. But then we also just asked them about general public charging experiences, and it goes back to those 3 points that I had mentioned: charger reliability, the location and convenience, and the speed of charging. Which, again, if you look at the Tesla network, location, they're pretty good. They're on major throughput ways, and you can find a Tesla charger fairly easily. Speed of charging, well, they're all fast chargers, so you don't have to worry about a level 2 charge and having to wait a little bit longer. And then reliability, well, Tesla owns that network, and as I was talking about before, they have ownership, so they're gonna maintain them. So that issue is not as prevalent with Tesla owners.
Okay. Did you ask anything about towing with an EV in this survey?
No, towing an EV is still something new for C.A.A. At this point, we won't drag your car. We will put it on a flatbed, just given the experience and the advice from auto manufacturers when handling an electric vehicle. I do know that our automotive group and the executives of automotives, senior executive of the automotive and roadside assistants across the country are all looking at ways to best tow an electric vehicle driver or charge at the roadside. Technology is always evolving. If you think about where we were 10 years ago with electric vehicles, like I had said, 10 years ago, it was less than 1%. We're now, getting close to, we're over the 9% of new car sales are EVs. So a lot has changed in the last 10 years. And that also goes for towing. I will mention that some of the clubs, so depending on where you are in the country, if you're in the Niagara region, for example, and you're a member of C.A.A. Niagara, you might actually see a C.A.A. Ford Lightning. Because they purchased a Ford Lightning, and they'll use it for, some of the smaller calls, not the calls that require a tow. But if, even if you're a nice vehicle and you've locked your keys in the car, C.A.A. can come and use their Ford Lightning to unlock that car, or to boost you in the winter or something like that. So we're starting to experiment and put our money where our mouth is and experiment with some of these electric vehicles ourselves. And if you're in Atlantic, at C.A.A. Atlantic, we actually own a Tesla, and we lend it out to members. And we let them drive it around the city for a few hours so they can experience driving an electric vehicle, and they can see that it's not a golf cart. It's actually a pretty cool car. And then we'll drive it around to different EV shows and encourage people to test it out, because we know that's a huge help when you have someone who's curious. If you can get them in an EV and test it, and they actually see that it's just a regular car, and in some cases better, then a lot of them will switch over and actually consider purchasing an electric vehicle.
Hey, Jason, I think we've had a pretty good run of questions here. Maybe, is there anything else you want to get on there, or are we pretty well through?
I'm just skimming through to see. Bear with me for a moment. We certainly have a lot.
I know. So a lot of questions I notice coming in that really aren't I would say appropriate or aren't on topic. So they're good questions. We appreciate all the questions, but some of them just aren't for our guest tonight, not for Kristine. So
Yes, I'll ask one last one. And Kristine, my apologies for phrasing that previous question badly. What I was asking about is people who tow with their EV. So I
Oh, yes.
own a Lightning and I tow my trailer. Uh, did you capture anything about that in your survey? If not, it might be a good question for.
Yes. I would have to say it's a very good question. It's a question I regret not asking because as someone who's in the market for an electric vehicle right now, that's one of my curiosities and questions, is I wanted to figure out which EV I could get that I can actually tow a small tent trailer with. So I know it's on the mind of EV owners wanting to make a transition, but maybe you still go camping, or maybe you still want to the towing capability. Again, C.A.A. Niagara does have a Ford Lightning, and they'll experiment once in a while towing with the Ford Lightning. It does lose quite a bit of charge once you start to tow it, so it loses quite a bit of its efficiency. But again, we're trying to figure out, the best way to tow things. So that's sort of what C.A.A. is experimenting with. But a very good question, which is something that's actually been on my mind, is how can we be an EV owner and also be able to tow a trailer?
Okay.
we can have a conversation about that offline if you like. I have some ideas for you.
One,
Awesome, perfect.
one last general question, Tim.
Okay.
Uh, so, Kristine, we've had a number of questions regarding CAA insurance, so it's obviously on people's minds. If people have questions about insurance and changes and so on, what's the best way for them to get information? Um,
So if they are a C.A.A. member, to contact our insurance company directly, and you can ask the question there. You can also reach out to me. I'm not an insurance expert, but I do have insurance colleagues who I reach out to when people ask me questions when it comes to insurance, because I think it'll really be dependent on the question, especially if it has anything to do with policy for insurance. A call center employee might not be able to answer that particular question. If you're interested in knowing sort of what services and products are available for EV owners, for sure you should communicate with C.A.A.'s insurance company directly, because they have products and services, and they'd be more than happy to walk anyone through those options for you. But if they're more policy and reasons for certain things, feel free to reach out to me directly, and we'll try to uncover it together.
okay, and
All
your
right.
contact info was at the end of your presentation,
It was.
which we'll post it on YouTube so everyone can skip back and look that up if they need it.
Absolutely. All right,
Thanks.
Jason. Thanks, Jason. Thanks so much for going through all those questions. And Kristine, again, thank you very much for coming on. Thanks for sharing the survey results. I hope that some of the members listening and or non-members listening will, if they have good questions that they think belong on a survey that can get out to 7 million Canadians, that they send them to you, and that they can find your email address on the CA website to do that. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope this was insightful. And yeah, please feel free to, if you have ideas for future questions, send them my way, and they might make it into a future survey.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. So, on next month's episode of Canada Talks Electric Cars, we'll take a look into, really, for me anyway, the fascinating electric future of transportation. And we have a really interesting guest speaker, a gentleman by the name of Michael Barnard. Michael is I'm not going to say a futurist, but he's extremely well informed individual on many aspects of energy, sustainability, and the like. And he projects scenarios for decarbonization of transportation 40 to 80 years into the future. A remarkable sort of vision, and that really provides a roadmap for businesses and industry. So it's going to be a very interesting presentation. I hope you'll all come. It's going to be on Tuesday, November the 7th. Again, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Hope you'll be there. Another quick reminder: when you're using public chargers, to check in with your Charge Hub app, to add comments and maybe take a few photos to make it a little easier for the next EV driver coming along to find that charger and let them have a good experience with it. On behalf of the webinar team here at EV Society, thanks for joining us for today's episode and for your continued support of the monthly webinar. We really appreciate it. From all of us at EVS, and until next time, stay well. This will conclude tonight's webinar.